and there's only 30, there's 30 or so bills that pass that involve energy efficiency, beneficial electrification, clean energy. There's a lot of names being thrown around out there in regards to that. And that's driving part of what's happening in our marketplace. We also have on this call, a wide group have joined today. So we have the utilities, the cities, we have other nonprofits that participate in the DSM processes for rebate plans with utilities, as well as legislation. And this group is designed, the Heat Pump Action Group is designed for contractors, distributors, and manufacturers. And today, just want to let everybody know that we have a lot of the industry stakeholders, and we're excited that you're here because the industry stakeholders are driving a lot of the goals that are happening. And so how do we have all of us work together and align what we're doing and working off of the realities in the marketplace? And so we are excited that everybody's here today. And we do ask that the contractors, distributors, and manufacturers, that we're talking about how we're all going to work together today. And the industry stakeholders, we want you to be able to listen in and help us design how we're all going to work together going forward. With that, what I want to do is talk about some of the drivers of why we're looking at what you need to do your business and how would we accelerate heat pump sales and how you transition if you're doing HVAC into heat pumps sales. So what we want to do is talk about a couple groups that have been driving this, and one of them is the Beneficial Electrification League of Colorado. The Beneficial Electrification League is a national organization, but locally in Colorado is one of the first local chapters. And the collaborating group, we want to talk about what recently had happened. And I thought Ann Kirkpatrick from Excel Energy, she's actually chairing and co-chairing the quality install group that's a part of that. So we wanted her to talk about some recent meetings that were exciting and have an impact on where our industry is going.
Thanks, Patricia.
Yeah.
So this group is meeting weekly, which is a big time commitment for its 4 utilities, 2 industry groups, Colorado Energy Office, and 2 of the cities who have the most aggressive goals for heat pump adoption. But all of the folks that you can see on the slide, if we want to throw up that slide, changes are coming, what's driving it, are the organization. So EEBC and SWEEP are the industry groups. The utilities are Holy Cross, Platte River Power Authority, Tri-State Generation, and Excel Energy. So we're not by any means the only ones who are working on it, but we're certainly a strong group of industry, of very engaged voices. But can I just say for a minute, like, there are a lot of engaged voices in this. I think we're just starting to see kind of the swell that's coming. What the Quality Installation Committee's goal is, or the initial intent was for us to focus in on the installation related kind of contractor and manufacturer distributor issues that are different than the business as usual AC and furnace kinds of installations. And from that, it grew into reviewing the work that Patricia helped do for the Colorado Energy Office associated with this group, asking what the top priorities were. And one of those was, one of the very top was customer engagement, education, if you will, and distributor and manufacturer engagement. So with that in mind, we put together, as we continued to talk this year, 2021, it became clear that there are so many drivers that are happening, and it would be good to promote that message. And so on August 26th, we had a meeting specifically for distributors and manufacturers as first step, just to kind of state that case of what's really happening and what are the drivers. So some of the things that came out of that was, for example, in Colorado in 2021 alone, there have been over 30 pieces of legislation that are tied to clean energy and beneficial electrification. And then, as you can see on this slide, there are 6 utilities that provide 91% of Colorado's electricity that are committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by at least 80% by 2030. And you can see some of those here. But that's, those are just two of the proof points. And so many of the electric utilities in Colorado already are providing rebates for heat pumps to help offset the cost between an air conditioner and a heat pump. There are also some additional rebates. And there is this website that I'm getting dry-throated and I don't know why, but loveelectric.org/rebates is a site to go to that has all kinds of proof sources, great information. I would highly recommend it. Patricia, I think you're going to have to do the last slide. I'm going to cough.
Okay, great. So some of the outcomes that were really exciting from the very first meeting on August 26th, just great communication in the outcomes of afterwards, the presenting organizations that we talked about, along with the contractors, distributors, and manufacturers, are now collaborating on different items. And some of the big ideas that came out of this that were probably previously wouldn't have been tackled just because we didn't have that communication going between the utilities and the cities. So the utilities are working on an agreement across all the utility territories. A couple things that are creating consistency for the contractors, manufacturers, and distributors from city to city and across the state is defining what is a qualified heat pump and what is a qualifying cold climate heat pump. Also aligning all the incentives across all the utilities. And then the one that is probably a much more daunting challenge than the group realized when we just started working on it, but one universal heat pump rebate application. We've been asked about, can you guys create a consistent one-page application? And I want to give some kudos to the group because since that original meeting in August, they've been meeting every Tuesday and working on these three items. So they're being very responsive and taking it very seriously. It's not going to be a goal that can be reached within 6 months, but who knows if it could be a year or 2 years maybe, because it's aligning a lot of utilities. But one of the comments from Tri-State earlier today, who's in the group, said, wow, if we as a group in Colorado, the utilities can accomplish these three goals, he's like, we can do anything. So it's exciting to see that effort to help the marketplace and help our members that are delivering HVAC and heat pumps in the marketplace, how to incentivize us to make it easier to deliver heat pumps. Anne, is there anything you want to add to that?
I think the big idea here with the working groups is, as well, what we hope to get from it is basing the decisions that we're making that have to do with programs and what we're bringing to market, how we're bringing it to market. We want to be sure we're addressing your needs. We want to base our program designs in what's really happening in the market, what your top needs are, what training is most important for you. And so we're so glad that you're willing to tell us what you need. And then this information is something that we can all use without each of us reaching out to you individually saying, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? So it's a great use of time for all of us.
And in regards to the working groups, the piece that's going to be so helpful is to collaborate just among ourselves too, so that when we can prioritize and say, okay, we have 25 contractors that are saying this, and it aligns, and we also have had some of the utilities say, look, we'd like to come to your groups rather than waiting till the next plan comes out every couple of years, talking earlier in an informal way so that they can come in, like Anne and the channel managers and the program managers can come and use you as a panel and bounce ideas off of you. And you can also tell them things that are working and aren't working and why this would work and not work. And so we're hoping that with how quickly the market is changing right now, every 2 years, and with this ramp up that's happening by 2030, that we can open those lines of communications and really make it easier and quicker for all of us to respond and work together to get what we need in the marketplace happening.
The only other thing I would add is that we recorded that presentation. It's like 20 minutes long, and Patricia and team have included those links so you can listen to it. Great resource.
Yeah, and it's been edited down. It's 20 minutes, so it's not a long period, and it is like speed dating. Literally, organizationally, everybody will talk for 2 minutes and give you the highlights. It's fast and furious, and so it's, I wouldn't say it's, riveting, but it's definitely a lot of really good information. It would be a great piece for your management to see because it shows the trends that are happening and how many organizations and what the goals are that are aligned between all the organizations. And so, and you're talking about your forecasting and engaging your management and your sales team. This is proof of here's what's happening, here's the goals. And it talks about some of the myths as well. We got some myth busting going on in there. So it's well done in terms of here are the cold climate heat pumps do work in Colorado, those types of things. So it's worth watching, I would say. So with that, anything else, Anne? Great. Okay, so let's go to the next section. So what we want to talk about too is the findings from Colorado Energy Office, the report that Anne mentioned earlier. It was a heat pump market acceleration, looking at the top barriers to accelerating heat pump installs in Colorado. And it also, some of the outcomes are driving how do you mobilize a supply chain in Colorado to make those increases. So we're going to put just a couple of highlights from that up. Okay, so there were 10 top barriers identified to installing heat pumps. And this is from the utility program managers, the contractors, distributors, and manufacturers. And they were all asked the same survey. It was 6 utility markets, and asked the same questions to identify what are the top barriers that you're struggling with in your business and to accelerate and install heat pumps. And the consensus, there was 2 top priorities. I was surprised that it wasn't quality installs because after they were very thoughtful in their responses, but the top 2 barriers was getting the buy-in of the contractor companies, the contractors owners, the managements, and the sales teams. Because if they're going to send their staff in techs to get trained, need the buy-in, to fully go into the marketplace from the contractor management. The other was the consumer awareness. And this is the top 10 that rose when asking the question. So the first 2 was the buy-in and the contractor ownership that we just talked about, consumer awareness, that was marketing, and it was then the next 2 that kind of went together is the pricing gap, field driven, and then rebate levels, having them be at parity with the HVAC options, and then quality install, and especially the cold climate heat pump quality installs, leads generation, sales, jobs estimating, systems design, availability to the contractors, and then installer QI requirements, certification statewide. Really, the last one was the lowest of all priority, but the systems design did rise up in the training a little bit higher with some groups. So what we want to do in the action groups is identify for the contractors, distributors, and the manufacturers, which of these do you want to focus on? These groups are designed for you, and you get to drive what is the critical things that you need in the way of support. And then we're going to work with all the stakeholders and all the groups to develop that to help us accelerate in the marketplace. A couple of additional barriers, just I thought were interesting to note for you, supply chain. They were talking about low interest financing for consumers, lack of labor available for contractors, and we're going to talk about that later. Cooperative utilities, so the co-ops and the munis talked about power supply, electric panel upgrade costs, transformer upgrades costs being passed on to the consumers, and then rate tariffs and some other solutions to consider. So the other finding that was surprising, but important to talk about with the 3 groups, is that the distributors were identified to influence the contractor's success the most in the supply chain. And so we have some questions for you in terms as distributors about that role and what you need and what your goals are and aligning them as well. So a lot of the discussion that we had in the BEL-CO meeting were driven out of this finding of really looking into the distributors' needs as well in the manufacturers. Oh, and the other piece that why we're all here and putting into action, another finding was just aligning the heat pump supply chain is in the first circle up there. You can see the supply chain in the construction industry. And then we've got Colorado Energy Office, the cities, the state, nonprofits, industry stakeholders. There are a lot of people working on this, and how do we connect the dots between all of us? And that's what these action groups are designed to do. So I wanted to just take a moment and have Jonathan Moscatello from the heat pump store just to give us a quick testimonial from the contractor perspective. In the Pacific Northwest, when the utilities had made an effort to accelerate heat pump sales in 4 states, and Jonathan, you can mention that later, but if I'm right, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana, the heat pump store was one of the companies that did a significant amount of the rebates over the last 13 years. And Colorado is positioned in that same place right now in the marketplace, getting ready to make that jump. And so we wanted to get some perspective on where he thought there are more opportunities in Colorado than what they had 13 years ago, just to kind of give us some insight.
Yeah, thanks, Patricia. And for everybody on the call, even though I'm from Oregon, I'm a member of the EEBC. And that's because really for my day job, I consult with utilities and manufacturers. And I've been doing a lot of work in Colorado and Minnesota, 2 states that are going through some process of strategic or beneficial electrification. And, you know, I've been able to do that consulting work because my wife and I built this heat pump only contracting business. It started in 2007, and we really got mostly involved in that in 2011. But our little company, and it's a little heating company, right? We've done probably upwards of maybe 20% of all of the rebated installations that have taken place in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. And when we started that company, people told us we would starve. It's not possible to have a heat pump only HVAC contracting business. I share that because I wanted to highlight the experience that I can draw on and maybe share with you, but also to say that the conditions that I see in Colorado are even better than what we had to work with back starting in 2007 and later. And so looking at, drawing on this experience that my wife and I have accumulated over the years and looking at what's going on in Colorado, here's what I predict: that a whole bunch of marketing is going to take place to raise consumer awareness. And this is going to happen from utilities and government, public entities of all sorts. And that combined with things like code changes and other regulation that will, I think, be enacted. I think that with pretty high likelihood. Within 18 to 24 months, that there will be something like 47,000 to 87,000 heat pump installations per year in the state of Colorado. So in pretty short order, I think the value of that business could be anywhere from $350 million a year to $650 million a year. Those numbers represent upwards of a 3.7x growth in the current HVAC industry in the state of Colorado. This should both excite you and cause you to go, oh my God, because this is nothing short of amazing. And so if you're on the call and you're a distributor or a contractor, all of the work that I just mentioned is going to fall on your shoulders, right? For contractors, you're going to do all of these installations, and you have to very quickly accumulate all of the expertise required to properly apply and install a heat pump, and develop all of the skills needed to manage that kind of business and growth, to be really efficient in the installation work that you do. Now, if you're a distributor on the call, I think all of the organizations involved think that it's your job to provide the training for those contractors. I've heard that from them, so I can say that with confidence. And for the distributors, I think you have to ask yourself, first of all, do you believe it's your responsibility? If not, let the EEBC know, let your membership organization know. If you're a distributor who does believe that it is your role to provide that training, do you have what you need in terms of the content and the curriculum, the manufacturer support to deliver that kind of training and workforce development, even possibly, to make all of this happen? I encourage you to really give this some thought, these questions, and let the EEBC know, because I have to tell you, I wish in the state that I live in, Oregon, that we had something like the EEBC, something that's made up of contractors and other industry that operate in the space to help advocate on our behalf. We don't have it. And in Oregon, we have the same ambitious goals that are here in Colorado. And it's, you have a real special opportunity to insert yourselves in these conversations and get what you need to be able to fulfill this very public mission. So I hope that this has provided some perspective and context. I've been chirping with Patricia and talking about this quite a lot over the last month. And obviously I feel pretty excited for you all. And, I'll do my part as a member and what I can to help. So that's it for me, Patricia.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. And just to frame up, when he had said 20% in those 4 states, I think they've processed over 100,000 rebates in the last 13 years, and they installed about 20% of them. So super exciting to know that the heat pump contractor only, that it's possible. And in our organization, the EEBC, we have both HVAC and heat pump members, and we have members that are doing gas energy efficiency installs as well as electric. And so we have a combination of both. And so we're looking at how do we help the heat pump contractors that are in the business grow, and then look at the ones that are transitioning. And I know Ann earlier today had talked about when they had their sales training, and they've been talking about Excel gearing up now or catching up later. And so I hope it's okay that I said that, but I think that's part of what's happening. These trends are coming whether we like it or not. And it really is when we're going to get on board. And so we, as the EBC, always want to be ahead of those trends. And that's part of what we, provide in our membership and value to you. And at the end, we'd like to open it up for some conversation. So this is all about how our approach and how do we mobilize the heat pump supply chain together. Jonathan had talked a little bit about that trajectory, and this is a shared slide that the organizations in BEL-CO have been using, that we talked about, Denver and Boulder and PRPA and Excel and Holy Cross and Sweep in the EEBC. If you take it, I'm trying to do this quickly, but if you look at the first stage down there in orange, tinkering. So if we look at the last decade or two, we believe in Colorado, we have a 1 to 2% market penetration total for the state of Colorado. And Jonathan was doing some projections and putting numbers instead of percentages to the blade years, stage 2, that we're looking at from 2021 to 2023, and what that growth can be. And as we're all mobilizing right now, the goal is, and it's the hockey stick here. So the goal is that in the next 2 years, some of the things Jonathan was talking about, that we get them rolling between all of our organizations. So there's this inflection point that starts this curve. So we move from 3% growth in start moving into 5 to 6 to 7 to 10% growth. And this is a standard curve that in startups that they talk about in implementing a product in the marketplace. And so that's the goal, is to hit that inflection point. And talking about codes and what's happening, Denver is going to be releasing their 2021 codes, net zero only buildings going forward. Those things are going to be happening. So if you look at the hockey stick and we talk about forecasting where we're going to go by 2030 with all these goals, with the legislation that went through and whatnot, we want to, how do we get to 50 to 80% market penetration to meet those goals? And so this is why all of our organizations are working together and looking at this timeline, and we're hoping that you'll align your goals, especially, distributors and manufacturers, looking at your forecasts. How do we all take advantage of this so we can be quadrupling our business on a regular basis? Because I think the opportunity is going to be there. And how do we do it all together? I mean, that's the whole point. So I think the goal of having our action groups, having these working groups, is so we can help accelerate that. And we're excited, the strong interest that we have today in looking at the groups that are on the call. We have the utilities, we have the energy efficiency stakeholder groups, but then we have the distributors, manufacturers, and contractors. We did not expect to have as strong of an interest from the stakeholders groups. And so I think there's really important that we need to pay attention to that and figure out how to work with our action groups, our distributors, manufacturers, and contractors. And I am going to, Anne put in the chat, BEL-CO's goals for 2030 are 160,000 heat pump installs. And that is only a couple, that really just tracks with how the market has been, and how do we leapfrog that is what we want to look at. But that 300,000 by 2030, I think that we can actually beat that. But that is the BEL-CO goal to start off with. So the action groups, some of the outcomes, so we'll have a contractor group, and we're putting the distributors and manufacturers together. We're looking for the contractors and the distributor manufacturer group. We usually have a co-chair and a chair of those, and we want them to not be our organizations, but actual contractors and distributors and manufacturers. And we'll have that rotate out every probably 2 years. The goal is that you guys set the goals. You look at, here's the barriers, here's what we need to work on, here's what we want to communicate, here's the resources we need. So I've listed a couple things there and said, what do you need to grow your business? What do you need to solve for, and by when, to meet certain goals? How do we make it easier for us to stay ahead of the curve by taking advantage of these industry stakeholder and alliance goals? And then what Anne was talking about earlier is the field realities, that we have the opportunity to have the reality of what is happening in your business today to inform and feed better utility community rebate program design for your business. And there's a connection between all of us in that. So really quick, I just want to run down the role the EBC has played in the past with our policy action committees, which is where your companies have participated a lot. It's giving you line of sight to what's coming, understanding how to take advantage of what's coming, the competitive advantage you have in forecasting the rules, the regulations, and the market transitions. And we've been doing this for the past 15 years, influencing utility heat pump programs and rebates. Specifically, this next year, EBC is going to be participating in Excel's DSM, which is the rebate plan, demand side management, for 2023-24. And then also every 5 years, there is a strategic issues filing. And what that is, every 5 years, the DSM plan for all the IOUs for the investor-owned utilities, Black Hills and Excel, set their goals for 5 years. And there's a cap that is set on how much money is set aside, what is the budget for rebate programs. And it's in the last DSM docket, it was set just under 100 million. And so there's big decisions. And the thing that we need to also be ready for is have their action groups ready to give input into is Excel is going to be working on the beneficial electrification plan. And what that means is, are we going to change from the TRC for the savings from energy efficiency rebates are going to include more of the decarbonization or carbon-free goals in them? Are there more NEBs, more of the non-energy benefits? Like all those types of decisions are going to be affecting the gas rebate programs and the electric rebate programs. And so out of strategic issues that will start in March, probably end at the end of the year, November-ish, will then influence and make probably a lot of changes to the 2023-2024 rebates. So our quarterly membership meeting that's coming up, and we're calling it Buckle Up for 2022, because there are major decisions and changes coming this next year. And these action groups, you're critical. We need to have the voice of the contractors, distributors, and manufacturers in all of our industries giving feedback and helping to shape what you're going to need to play in this new world in these next 9 years that's happening with those 2030 goals. The other piece that also we've participated in influencing the energy efficiency legislation as well. We'd rather give input into it so that what comes out in terms of the bills and what gets implemented in the marketplace fits your business needs. And if we don't give feedback and ask for changes and addendums in that process, we end up holding the bag, you know, as the companies that are out there in the construction industry implementing and installing and selling the products and services. So some of the new things that are happening because of this partnerships and us working with the stakeholders is, how do we minimize your risk in this transition for heat pumps? How do we accelerate your heat pump sales while transitioning if you're doing HVAC only? Prioritizing content and feedback for trainings. We're going to be able to give direct feedback to the utilities and the cities and the different groups that are providing trainings for us. Better positioned to drive profit healthy heat pump sales, different resources that you need that Anna talked about earlier. And one of the things that EEBC is adding that we haven't done before is we're working with the pipelines and the organizations that are developing construction curriculum and clean energy curriculum to develop more skilled labor. And we have a couple grants that the EEBC has gotten, so that in joining this group, if you're a part of the working group, you'll be able to give feedback in the curriculum. And when they graduate, our organization will have first right of refusal for the heat pump working group for more trained and skilled techs who have gone through an orientation. So we hope that as your business is increasing and you need more labor, and that the EEBC has been listening to you for the last couple of years, saying this is one of your major problems, and we're working on how do we bring you even not maybe, you know, skilled labor, upskilled labor, and labor that is specifically trained in heat pumps and certified. So that's something that we've got to figure out in these groups, and I think it's a pretty exciting opportunity, and we're have relationships, and this will start in January 2022 as one of our first grants starts to help figure out how do we deliver labor to help you as you grow. So with that, we have about 20 minutes left. We'd like to open it up and have you ask questions, and we have some topics that we've put up here to include. And the one thing I want to make sure we do before we end the meeting is that we look at what our next, you know, what's the cadence of the meetings for the action groups, and maybe get some feedback on that before we end today. So with that, we had talked about asking a couple of these questions, but before we move forward, so one of the questions that we have is, you know, what questions do you anticipate customers will ask about heat pumps that you don't have answers to? And if you would put your name in the chat box, and then we'll call on you. So Jacob said, what is the definition of a cold climate heat pump? I don't know, Anne?
Yeah, I almost have this memorized, but I'll tell you that the definition varies by organization right now. So one of the things that is pretty ubiquitous is that NEEP, the Northeast Energy Efficiency Project Partnership. I'm sorry, I can't remember what the P stands for, but NEEP, N-E-E-P, has their own cold climate heat pump database that most of us are relying on, because AHRI doesn't give a rating at 5 degrees. They give they give a 47 degree and a 17 degree, but not the 5 degree. And one of the things that we know happens with heat pumps is that as it gets colder outside, the capacity of a heat pump drops. And so it's more expensive. You know, the electric energy is more expensive when you get down to colder temperatures for a lot of systems. Some are much more efficient than others. So that's part of it. So right now there are 4 considerations: SEER, EAR, HSPF, and COP. So I don't want to spend too much time on that, but we're in the process of looking at those different things. Do you want me to state the Xcel Energy definition?
And Rob Foley put in a note that he could answer that question as well. So let's see what Rob says, and then
Sure.
you can tell them what you guys are working on.
Sounds good.
Well, I think the simple answer to that question is that the heat pump needs to provide sufficient capacity for heating at the design temperature of that climate, right? So the answer is going to be different if you're up in Vail than if you're out in Fowler, right? And so, but basically the idea is that you need to have sufficient capacity at your design temperature, which is basically, you know, the coldest your property is going to get to in the winter. You know, ASHRAE calls it only 1% of the time of the year, it's going to be colder than that. So ideally, that's what you're shooting for with a cold climate heat pump. And of course, the original generation of heat pumps were only good down to about 40 degrees or 35 degrees. So that's what we're looking for. We want the heat pump to be providing almost all of the heating for it without going to resistance electric or going to a dual fuel. That's what you're shooting for.
Awesome. That's a great overview. Or does that not?
Patricia, I could jump in there too and give like a manufacturer's perspective.
Okay.
I think Rob provided a great like desire from a application standpoint. Manufacturers can't design for every particular design temperature, but they have come up with this wonderful little thing which says the 47 degree rated capacity, whatever that number is, we want to deliver that 100% of that rated capacity at 47 degrees at 5 degrees Fahrenheit also. And that is actually a little bit more stringent than what the NEEP current level is, but many of the leading manufacturers that work in the market are able to produce 100% of the 47 degree rated number at 5 degrees. In addition to that, the cold climate heat pump definition includes features that help the heat pump do its work at cold and it's sort of snowy conditions. So there's additional features that most of the leading manufacturers have, like a drain pan on the bottom that can sufficiently function with high moisture, cold climate environments. Not really Colorado's climate environment, but places in like the Northeast or the Northwest, we have cold, damp conditions. So we need these additional elements in the product. But I think for people in Colorado, that 100% at 5 degrees, and then the second piece is being able to continue to operate below 13 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's still ability to operate at that. So those two criteria I just mentioned are really the critical definitions that the manufacturers are working on.
So it's interesting, Jonathan. This is the first time that I can think of in recent history that someone has mentioned a criteria that's higher, that's more stringent than ours. It's kind of a relief to hear it. Ours is 70% of the capacity at 5 degrees of what it is at 47. So it's not 100%. There's a variation there, but I love that. That's great. It's great to know that manufacturers are working on that more stringent definition and capacity.
And that NEEP website is actually a fantastic resource because they have the performance curves for all the equipment that you would consider cold climate. So you can kind of compare almost every manufacturer's equipment to see what their similar performance is at those critical temperatures of 17 degrees and 5 degrees.
So that is a nice overview for all of us on the phone and on the call. And I think the bottom line is cold climate heat pumps work in Colorado is what it comes down to, which is a misperception by a lot of contractors out there. One of the questions that I see in the chat is the focus group intended to be residential, small commercial, and also large commercial? And I would say that is part of the group's decision. Definitely residential, that is what the utilities are focusing on. But if we had a couple of people that want to break out and do commercial, we can do that as well. This is your group. So if there is a group that is interested in commercial and having input in that, then we would accommodate that. The group will meet maybe as a large group. It really depends on our first meeting. So please be at our first meeting to help us design and figure out what you need and what everybody's looking at. So that means maybe we break out and they'll be, half the group will say, we're doing residential, but we also want to have a commercial focus as well. So And I don't know how the utilities feel about that, but that is, it's driven by what our members' needs are and what what you want to impact. I know there's the question from Chris, but I'm going to hold off on that one in terms of like what I tell my contractors friends assertion that when the power goes out, he still has his gas boiler to keep him warm. And I don't know if there's a quick answer to that or if that's something we should save.
I just answered it, Patricia.
So
It's a very common question, and it's one of those spurious questions because a boiler really can't operate without electricity either. Gas furnaces can't either. So, but it's common. People ask that question all the time.
So that is part of our first question, right? What do you get asked? Are you ready to answer it? And do you have enough information? So that is really good to know.
I think if it's possible, this working group could literally start keeping a list of the common questions and what the answer is. Because I mean, the Chris Piper's question is a really good one. It's common, and there's dozens of them, and it's probably one of those great little projects for the group to be focused on. I can't think of any as we're talking, but I know there's tons of them.
Yeah, well, and I think that's what we don't think about it till we're in that situation, and that would be part of the goal. Like, right, we want a resource. So if there is a training that is, here's all the questions I get answered, I never know what to ask, what to answer, then we need to address that, right? And maybe there's a FAQ or something for the sales team, or there is a, we do a Zoom call and we walk through those and we go back and we get the best answers, or we all collaborate. Some contractors might have a great answer. And I mean, that's the idea, right? We want to get your sales teams on it and ready to go. So they feel like they can handle anything they're going to walk into and make a sale. So are there any other questions? I know we have about 6 minutes left.
Yeah, Lou Grounds is asking, he says, I'm working on a church in Lakewood. Is there a certified list of cold climate heat pump manufacturers?
I would recommend going to that NEEP database and taking a look at the manufacturers.
So
they have units that qualify for that list today.
And I'm wondering if that should be a criteria. So Love Electric, by the way, is listing, you can go on Love Electric website and find heat pump contractors, but we've never they haven't added the criteria of which ones. I know, Ann, you're frozen, so I don't know if I'm frozen, if everybody can hear.
No, Patricia, we can hear you. I would, if I can put it, as a guy who's been around this for a while and been a little confused by it all, I feel like utilities do this thing where they want to try to cast the biggest, widest net. So in the case of the NEEP list, it's chock-a-block with products that to me don't meet a cold climate definition. Like, I wouldn't install one of the products unless it could produce 100% of the rated capacity at 5 degrees, for instance. And so I feel like there's something that's another EEBC heat pump work group product is like, let's have standards that are really rigorous and for which there are great manufacturers available, and not do that thing that I see utilities do around the country, which is try to make something for everybody to participate with. But there's heat pumps in there that really aren't that great. I mean, they operate down to -13, but they don't make a lot of heat, for instance. And so I don't know if anybody's interested in that too. And maybe that's something where the EEBC, we could have a list of heat pumps that, or a set of criteria that we think are right for Colorado's cold climate. Maybe our members would find that helpful. I don't know, just an idea.
Yeah, and also the quality install committee with BEL-CO might be interested in that with the utilities in the cities as well. And I think this is where there'll be this synergy that'll happen where our group might identify something and then it'll get fed out and we'll have communication about that, of how much of a priority is it. And you know, the utilities, I think, are interested in responding like they did at the last meeting, you know, with how do we handle the rebates? And here's 3 things that would make a big difference in the marketplace. So great comments and feedback on that, Jonathan.
The other thing to remember is that, right, it's not the utility's responsibility to design an HVAC system. That's the contractor's responsibility, right? So we want to give the contractor resources to make really good design decisions independent of what the utility says, right? It's right? That's the contractor's job.
Absolutely. I know we're at time. We have 2 minutes. And the one thing I wanted to ask as well, so thank you for everybody's comments. Super appreciate it. Any feedback really quick on the frequency of holding our meetings? Is it a monthly? Is it at every 2 months? And I would suggest maybe we start with monthly until we feel like we're ready to put a larger space in between. So any comments on that or thoughts before we go? And appreciate everyone joining today. Feel free to add any comments about the value that you see in doing this, as well as any other comments that will help us in putting together our first meetings for our contractors, manufacturers, and distributors. Monthly, I see a couple monthlies. And quite frankly, we did not address the stakeholder groups. If there is meetings necessary for that or their report outs, we did not expect that. So it just shows the interest and the need, I think, for all of us to work together. So that is all I have. Any other comments before we go? Super appreciate it. And I hope you're excited about this. I think there's some great opportunities for all of us to really impact our businesses in the marketplace. And we're going to stay on. If you want to put more comments in the chat, we're not going to drop off. We'll stay on here for a second, just in case you know, we need anything else. Anybody else wants to make comments?
So I got one comment, Patricia, which is that of all the things you talked about doing, I think the most important is driving the rebate structure. You know, the couple of things we really need to be focused on are what you mentioned, which is those non-economic benefits. Dual fuel is a big one, and fuel switching. Those are 2 huge elements that until we get permission to do those things, rebates are going to be pathetic. Nobody gets excited about $500. Frankly, nobody gets excited about $1,500. Which has historically been the problem with all rebate programs, is they're free rider programs. The only people who apply for rebates are people who are going to do it anyway. And so the thing that is going to drive change is providing sufficient incentive to get people to do what they weren't going to do. And that's not $500. I mean, in our other utility programs, until we're getting to $2,000 a door, we're not moving the needle. And that's going to take the, you know, that's the PUC seeing things differently. That's not Excel's fault. That's the PUC giving them permission to, you know, quantify the cost of carbon, reward energy savings, not just dollar savings. And that, you know, that's a long conversation to get to move that needle. But Rocky Mountain Power is already doing it. I mean, our rebate program with Rocky Mountain Power, especially with dual fuel, is phenomenal because they've allowed it.
So is ComEd.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we should probably think about too as well is that there's going to be a happy medium in between this change. And that is what Nick mentioned, is dual fuel.
Yeah.
And you know, there's options to go all the way towards electric, obviously, now, but I don't think you're going to get that adoption right away. I think that dual fuel is going to be something that we're going to have to consider as an interim towards that ultimate goal.
I agree. That is the absolute very best path to get heat pump adoption, is to essentially have the camel stick its nose under in the AC replacement cycle. And by talking to people who are just replacing the air conditioners and getting some partial heating transfer over by heat pumps, right? If we got incentives that can make the heat pump less expensive than the air conditioner, now we've got our foot in the door. And we're doing and then, you know, the other thing, you know, I've been in energy efficiency now for a dozen years, And for a dozen years, we've had cheap gas. Guess what? We finally don't have cheap gas.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing that's going to move the needle, and it has nothing to do with rebates, right? But again, that's going to have that. You're going to have a lot of contractor education to help them to educate their clients that we've reached this point where gas is now as expensive or more expensive than electric in certain applications.
Mhm.
They haven't had to think about that for the last dozen years. I think 2008 was the last time we had expensive gas.
Yeah, and provide good, easy to use tools for them to
Yep.
illustrate that to their customers.
And those are exactly what we want to work on in the heat pump working groups, right? That is the goal, is to go, okay. I also believe, and since we're kind of brainstorming here a little bit, when I put that hockey stick, that trajectory, that we're looking at, I think that we should all take a stab at putting real numbers and real growth based on what we think, like what you just talked about. Like, we would have to have which levers be pulled on the way that next 10 years to get that quadrupling, that trajectory. I think if we had the contractors, distributors, and manufacturers working on that alone, because putting percentages in front of everybody goes, okay, I get it. I see we're on this path. Got it. That makes sense. There's this inflection point. But if you could actually put numbers and say, if we do this as contractors in the market and we have this tool, we think that's going to go up 3%.
Yeah.
If we have, like that would be, how do you make the market change? Like, I think there's things like that we could be doing to drive.
I saw that hockey stick, Patricia, and it scared me a little bit, because if we had the end goal at 2030, which is an aggressive result that we're looking for, and we delay in the years 1 through 4 or so it's going to be so hard for the contracting community to do that much in that limited amount of time. Like, time's not, in many ways, not our friend. I mean, my wife's so busy in the business right now, and we're in Oregon. We don't even really have electrification policy really hitting the ground right now. We're just overwhelmed with normal market demand for what we're doing. So I think in Colorado, it's not much different. Like, everybody I talk to, the contractors are extraordinarily busy. And so I think we need like immediate things to drive the market toward heat pumps. And I think, I do consulting for manufacturers, right? I work for manufacturers. And I think it's probably something where if our organization decided this, and we could be effective by saying, we don't want ACs as an even option that's for sale in the state of Colorado for residential.
Yep.
I mean, you'll get heat pumps sold immediately, and the market will, society will pay through it in a normal way, right? Just for the product itself. So, there's like a lot of those little kinds of things that this group could talk about in advance to the membership and see if they're on board. And if we don't do it, nobody's gonna, right? It's like, it's the industry driven change that is going to be most effective. I gotta also mention something that Rob just said was really near and dear to my heart about we need big rebate. I mean, I don't want to be, I'm not being argumentative, Rob, when I say this, but I just disagree from my experience. Because when nobody has a heat pump, and they're not really even aware on a consumer level of what a heat pump is, no amount of money is going to motivate them if they don't know what that $2,000 rebate really is. And they haven't also connected a heat pump with what they really want for their home. Like, you can't buy something that you're not aware of. And there's really good data that was done for almost 10 years straight. The program that I worked for in the Northwest just did a fabulous consumer surveys for 10 years running to try to understand what amount of rebate would increase the likelihood of someone buying a heat pump. And it was surprisingly low. It was never, the rebate didn't function to offset the cost of a heat pump compared to an option. It just, $600 was the magic number. It enticed somebody who was aware of a heat pump and interested in buying one for their home. $600 moved them along to actually buy. Interesting, right? And it was good research data.
People buy, like you said, people buy for their own reasons. I mean, that's just the
Well,
way it is.
I guess my problem is I live in a world where I am trying to get people to do something they don't want to do, as opposed to a contractor
Yeah.
who has a customer who calls him up and says, I need a new system. I live in multifamily and I got to sell to property owners who don't want to replace anything, right?
Yeah.
So the only thing that moves the needle in my world is a huge financial incentive, because I'm
Yeah.
replacing 50 and 60-year-old furnaces. That's the world I'm living in, right? So the contract, you guys are working in a world in which people call you up and say, help. I'm living in a world where I call them up and say, I need you to do this. So I just live in a different world. So that's why I have that perspective, is in my world, and especially with the split incentive, where the property owner isn't even paying utilities, so he doesn't even care about energy savings. And that's a third of our housing in this country. And we're talking about, how do I get these people to make a decision in the next 30 years? Forget about the next 10 years. I got to get them to do it in the next 30. And I'm beating my head against the wall. So I
it's
live in a different world.
hardest sector to do energy efficiency type work in is multifamily, because the need is so great. I'm gonna throw out another idea. Like, if the EEBC could advance a direct installation fund for the state of Colorado to be used in low income and traditionally disadvantaged communities. California's got mechanisms in place. They're going to do great things in this place. The city of Portland, where I live, has $120 million set aside in a fund, and it's going to be used in direct install. And it's just such a breath of fresh air, because it's like, we know that rebates are often used by the people who need them the least, right? And in multifamily, there's just so much housing there. And so I think it's one of those ideas that, if industry doesn't advance it, who is?
Yeah.
Just
So in thinking about those two barriers that rose to the top in the Colorado Energy Office report, which was buy-in of the contract and consumer awareness, if you both had consumer awareness, would that help? Even on the multifamily side, just curious, Rob, because that is like how, we're prioritizing.
Well, I mean, certainly having the contractor awareness, right? But it's the consumer awareness is not going to come from advertising. I'll tell you that, right? Mm-hmm. Especially in multifamily, because property owners don't listen to Excel's energy efficiency program or commercial on the radio. That doesn't mean a thing to them, right? Mm-hmm. I've always thought that was a terrible waste of all energy efficiency money, was radio and TV advertising. I mean, spend it on rebates, spend it on measures, especially deep retrofits. But if we're talking about getting adoption, I absolutely agree that contractor awareness is miles and miles ahead of everything else, because we need the contractor, every time he's touching an air conditioner, thinking about, how do I turn this into a heat pump? That's the only way it's ever going to happen, because it's the contractor who's the one who's solving the property owner's problem, right? Consumers are not solving their HVAC issues, never. They are always dependent on a contractor to solve it for them. So all of our resources need to be spent on the contractors understanding the need to go from gas to heat pumps, however we pull that off. Until contractors are on our side and thinking in terms of that, it's not going to happen, because they're the ones making those retrofit decisions. You can drive the market in new construction with building codes, absolutely. But 3/4 of what we're talking about here, or 80% of what we're talking about here, is the retrofit, not the new construction. Mm-hmm. And there, it's all going to be driven by contractors. Or in our crazy world of multifamily, I don't know how we solve that problem. We're working hard at trying to solve that problem in multifamily, but it's certainly in single family and in commercial, it's all going to be contractor driven.
Well, and these are exactly what we want to work on. Like, how do we do that, right? When we're talking about, look at the hockey stick, and I'm like, how many contractors? There's 900 of them in Excel's territory. How do we turn that? But I also think there's also the strategy of the ones that are focusing on heat pumps. We got to get them rocking more, right?
Yep.
As well. So it's really focus on those first, and then how do you get to the other ones? These are the things that, and what do you need?
Right.
In the group. So any other feedback on putting these groups together before we go? appreciate the conversation. It's always helpful.
Can you remind me what the subgroups are that you're thinking of, or the
So,
committees? I can't remember what you're calling them.
so the contractor has their own action group. Then we were putting the distributors and manufacturers together. At one point, got some feedback that the distributors should be separate, the contractors separate, and put the manufacturers and the stakeholders together. But Pete and I had also talked about that, and he was like, put the distributors and manufacturers together, contractors on their own. And then there's times where they'll work together, but the contractors still need to have that autonomy to figure out what they need. That's the feedback I've gotten.
Manufacturers and distributors work together to solve the same problems, and that's really why we need to be together.
Yeah.
Because as everybody knows, it's in this business, supply chain interruption has been very painful. But there's a lot of options, to help those situations. But keeping those two groups together is super important.
Yeah.
And then I was just going to say this too, and I think from a standpoint of how to put numbers to the hockey stick, that has to come from the contractor. Because they see what's going on. The ones that are very forward thinking, they see what's going on and they see it starting to go that way, and they can help us understand what that need is, and put numbers to that. I don't think it's just a contractor thing. I think it has to be kind of a group discussion, contractors, distributors, manufacturers, but understanding that is going to be critical to be able to provide the need.
Well, I think out of even that discussion, the needs are going to rise in the conversation, right? If they're saying, okay, because they're doing a math problem and they're going, okay, this is how my business works today. And if I'm going to get to that number, I would need this. It changes the conversation instead of like, what do you need? Because then they start doing numbers, right? And then they start forecasting, right? And then they're going to, well, I need this and I need this. I'm going to need this. If I do this, I'll need that. If I do, like you're saying. So I like the idea of starting with the contractor there, because that is going to inform the distributor, right? What do I need to be giving these guys to get them to do that? And then in the manufacturer. So I think that would be super valuable, because then it would also be people need to visually see like, what are the numbers that we're talking about? And I feel like the BEL-CO group took a stab at some numbers, but I bet you those numbers are way more when you get the contractors working on that. So great feedback.
And that number they had for heat pump water heaters, I thought was staggering. It's like, nobody's doing that yet. Everybody should be doing that, but nobody's doing it. So how on earth do we have more heat pump water heaters than heat pumps installed?
It's a really insane thing, isn't it? I saw that too. And I could tell you from the Northwest, like, we've had heat pump water heater rebates for a good number of years now, and plumbers don't want to touch them because they're mechanical.
Yep.
And they have like requirements that they're just not comfortable with. And so like heating guys have been kind of dragged into it, and plumbing is regulated really difficultly in Oregon and Washington. Like, you have to pretty much be a plumber to touch a water heater. So it's stuck. And so there's like one plumber that's like the heat pump store, but he's like the water heater pump store. Like, that's pretty much his business model. And the utilities just hire him to do almost direct install for them. And that's how they've had some measure of success. So, so Pete, you're from, I think, GRE Larson. Do you guys distribute a heat pump water heater currently?
No, we don't at this point, but that's something that we could definitely, distribute. We don't have it in Colorado, but we can. I mean, we're nationwide, so we have different markets have different needs, and there's needs for heat pump water heaters in other markets as well. So yeah, I don't see that as being an issue. And I can tell you this right now. I mean, we're bought in. We're bought in, and we saw this coming a long time ago, and it's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity.
And your ownership has been driving it too. Like, you're all the way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they are fully behind it. And my boss is too as well. I think it's cascading through the whole organization. So
very cool.
Can how is water heating replacement regulated? Is it a plumbing license, or
It's the
can
same, yeah.
anybody?
It's the same. Yeah, it's painful. And like you said, they don't want to get involved with it because it's mechanical, so.
Yeah.
I think those are issues we're going to have to tackle, and and maybe that's something we have to lobby for, to get that kind of changed around. I mean, I understand the pressures. I mean, it's a low pressure water heater. You put an expansion valve, expansion tank on it, and you're good to go. But it's not that difficult, I don't think. And I think that's what we're going to have to focus on, is because if we're going to make that change and keep that going, if we don't get that done with the plumbers, if we can't make them change, then we're going to have to change something else.
Yeah.
To get it to work.
And really, the distributors are going to be the key for a lot of this contractor training, right? And because they're the ones making the decisions on what SKUs are in stock, right? Contractors are going to buy what's in stock, right? And so influencing them, and it's a chicken and egg thing too, right? Is Pete doesn't stock it because nobody's asking for it, right? So we got to get the contractors to be asking for it so Pete can stock it, so they can buy it.
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation with inventory management.
Yeah, but it's absolutely true with heat pumps as well, right? I mean, just one simple example is, how many dual fuel package units are there? Not many, right? And that would be something that could drive change, but nobody's going to buy it if it's not stocked, and nobody's going to stock it if you're not going to buy it.
Yep, that is going to be a good conversation in these action groups for sure. With that, is there anything else before we go? You guys are awesome. Awesome. All right.
Thanks, Patricia.
It's going to be a fun ride, you guys. It's going to be a fun ride.
Thanks, Patricia.
See all you guys. Take care.
Appreciate it. All right. Bye-bye.
See ya.